Hello everybody, Mark Bremer here. I had a number of requests to take a look at this image and kind of explain how I created the looks I have in here. We've got some reflected imagery. I've got some wine dripped on the table here that you can see reflecting in there, and there's some smoke in the scene. So I thought I'd just walk you through my files and my processes. I am a art mercenary since I do this professionally, and I really don't care what tool sets I use. All I care is that I can get things done on time and as easily as possible. So I mix a couple techniques together, although I'm using Daz's Carrara right here, and I wanted to explore how we model in this program with the spline modeler, looking at shader settings, and then looking at some Photoshop post-production in this. So now that you've kind of seen this image and would recognize it if you've been in the challenge areas for these things, let me close this up. The scene itself is super simple. I try to do everything as easily as I can, and I'm in the director camera because I have the render camera locked down so it doesn't move. So I only have two lights in this scene, and the camera itself, if I back out, we'll see it over here pointing at the glasses, and you can get a position for it that way. I've gone to the wireframe just so we can see it a little more easily, but what I want to cover is spline modeling and then look at the liquid and the glass shader settings, because those are really kind of what drives the entire scene here. If I go back to a solid object here, you can see that it's just a typical plane that I've dropped in, and it's just about as boring a scene as you can. I've got an HDRI background set in, and I'll go ahead and render a couple files real quickly. And since I'm working in a small space here, I don't think I can even drag over this thing far enough. Yeah, I can. How about that? Now let's see if I can make the image a little bit smaller here so I can grab it. There. Just so you can see what I'm doing over here on the right side a little bit. To select scene settings, I've loaded in different types of HDRIs, and let me render one out here real quickly for you. I've changed the one that I had in the scene that had the windows in it. I don't like setting up a bunch of stuff if I can happen. I've got a fairly robust collection of HDRI maps and JPEG maps to go ahead and create some different looks. It's like working in a photography studio. There are tons of things to set up to reflect in the glass to get that type of environment so you get a sense of space. This happens to be a sky HDRI. If I go ahead and come back in, we'll say let's switch this out. This is just really to show you the significance that the HDRI maps or environments will have on your scene. If I go to a studio area and pick some of my phase from this, I've got some that I think are highlighted right here that seem to work better than others, and that's loaded in. Let me do another quick render. You'll see how the character of the glass and the wine changes significantly simply depending on what is being reflected in the scene. There are tons of free HDRI maps out there. In fact, Carrara ships with a bunch of them. You can play with those and work with them. I have some high resolution ones I paid for the studio shot type of work that I do. So that is the environment in and of itself. I've set up in the spilled wine a little bit of reflection. Same thing for the wood. That is just a wood texture that's been tiled for this and has a little reflection set into it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the modeling, and then I'm going to come back in and talk about the shader settings specifically for the glass and the wine. The glasses themselves, let me go ahead and maybe change this a little bit so you can see this. I have one glass that I've duplicated. It's a spline object. The Carrara spline modeler is a very cool feature of modeling, and it was a great time saver before they got into some excellent ways to work with polygon sets. Let me go ahead and open the spline modeler right here. It's asking me if I want to create a new master, because all I did was duplicate the wine glass, and I'm going to say let's edit the master. I don't need to create a new one. So here's how I've kind of gone about this, and let me zoom in here a little bit. The spline model itself, let me go to a 4-up view. You can kind of see it on the walls. Is simply a path that's drawn inside of Carrara. The elegance of this is that it is a mathematical formula based on the path. So there's no polygons involved. The file size is really small, and the most important thing is that if I come in here and we zoom in on any of this, or I click the profiles in here, it's completely editable all the time. If I go ahead and select a path, I'll have to come in even closer. If I highlight one of these little nodes there, you'll be able to see it, and if I want I can go ahead and move it around, and I've got symmetry engaged with it. I'll undo that so we keep the shape in there. and it just shows up here in the glass itself. I keep the geometry surface fidelity very high for something like this. You won't see it in the preview. I crank this up to 800%. The only time this has an effect on the file size is if you convert this shape into a polygon shape. And when you do that, all of a sudden you'll get tons of polygons. So, next little trick with this, how do I get wine to fit on the inside? Well, if I come and look at the profile, let me go in a profile view here so we can see this a little more clearly. And I will shrink this up so we can zoom in a little bit better for the space I've got going on. I inserted a circle. I just drew a circle with the circle tool right here on the first plane, and then I took the pen tool and simply drew this profile with what are called Bezier curve handles. It's a nice way to go ahead and draw really smooth shapes. If you have any experience with any path drawing tools such as Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, these are not new tools. To get the wine, what I did, let me look in here, is that after I drew this path that begins at the base, comes up the stem, then goes back inside the glass, and then ends right here, I went ahead and created some cross sections. What you do to do that, there's a cross section right at the very middle, which is the circle that ends right here. I've got a cross section right at the very beginning where I started drawing, and that was the first one. But what I did is go in here and select specific nodes, and then come up 2 sections, and you go to create. The reason I did that is to make the liquid, all I do is duplicate this object, and then where I have got additional cross sections right in here, and you can kind of see it in this top shape up here, this becomes the actual wine. So it duplicates the exact shape of the glass perfectly, and I start eliminating node points until I get all the way up to where the wine is. I make sure the cross sections are filled, since that's one of the options. You can go ahead and fill them or leave them open. And I've got wine that perfectly matches the shape. Now what I've done, let's go ahead and get out of here and select, actually let me open up a new instance so you can see the liquid. The liquid is just the interior of the glass. One of the cross sections is highlighted right now, so you see that. And I took a cross section, shrunk it just a little bit with the scale tool, and then I created what's called a meniscus, where the water clings, or in this case the wine clings to the edge of the glass, and then the actual surface is lower than it is on the glass on the inside. Just one of those little reality types of things that if we pop over here into a render, oh, you can barely see it up here. If you've got a reflection map that picks up that curve, which is why I selected one of the window ones, it shows it off, and it just is a little more convincing in terms of the reality. Another spline shape to take a look at is this splash. This is a great trick to work with Carrara and create really complex shapes like this that are organic very, very easily. If we come back here to the modeling room, let me go ahead and click on Splash. Now you have to know, either I'm very, very lazy or efficient, and I don't want to draw these shapes, so what I did was find a shape online. Actually, I think this was a brush that I had inside Photoshop. But Photoshop and Illustrator and some other tools out there have the method to take a pixel-based image, and if it's high contrast, this was black and white, convert it to lines. So what I did is I went into Photoshop, or Illustrator actually imported it. You can do it in Photoshop, had that high contrast shape, and just said convert this to lines. So it created a single cross section that is this splash. Then what I did is I went ahead and just extruded it in a very, very small fashion. You can barely see the extrusion line, it's so narrow. And what I did to bring a little roundness to the edge is I engaged a feature, and this isn't going to let me drag it over. There we go. When the cross section, I added a cross section at the end, that's highlighted, and then I said, you know what, I want to go ahead and put a radius on this, and that's what I did. The one showing here is not showing. Let me go to sections, go to, there's only 2 cross sections here. 2, okay. Now we can see that I put in a radius, and it's got a very, very small bevel here. This is on the US standard system, so it's 0.03 feet. Really teeny. But this also gives just enough little detail in there that if we pop in and look at it, and we had a different texture map in here, you would see the edge of the liquid a little bit, just like you do on a real surface. So there's some of the modeling tricks to that. Let's pop in and take a look especially at the glass shader. I had a number of questions about that. So we'll come back to the main scene. Let me go ahead and pop into shaders. The scene is really light. I only have 3 shaders. There's the default gray, the glass, the wine, and the wood for the table. The glass is one of the ones you kind of have to play with and do a couple little quick renders. As you can see, it takes a little while to render because I've got refraction and stuff going on. Let me be quiet about that and just show you exactly what's happening right here. The color for glass, in my experience, should always be turned to black. And the reason for that is that if you start adding, or I should say the way Carrara works, is that when you've got brighter colors and then you've got highlight and shininess and reflection, the program will take the mathematics of that and start adding them together, which means that if I wanted a clear glass, you might think, well, it should be white. But if that happens, what Carrara does is it takes this white color and starts adding it into the highlight and shininess and reflection, and it blows out and turns completely white. If you want color to the glass, I'll turn this back to black. Color is added down in the transparency area. I didn't want color for this here. I simply wanted an intensity. So I just created a value. It's mostly light, but because the color is black, then I don't get this really high contrast, kind of blown out effect to it. A couple of other little things that are going on here with the transparency. I've got absorption set in here for white. One reason, if I come back in here, let's take a look at this. Glass, depending on which way you look at it, starts absorbing a little more light, and to convey that idea that there's some body to this glass, I like to engage absorption because it will turn the glass darker at certain areas where it's thicker, and it's a subtle effect, but it's also a very convincing effect. So when we come in here, that's engaged. At the top level of transparency, I've got the in-scattering set to black right here, and I had to engage the use absorption. Because I'm working with a standard medium scene, the environment area that I'm modeling in is 30 foot by 30 foot, and the absorption is really connected to the size of your scene. If we take a look at it right here and I back out, this is a 30-foot square area, so these are actually very, very large glasses. But the reason that has such a high value in the absorption is because these glasses, each one of these squares right here is 5 feet, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So to have it absorb at 4 feet means that the depth of that function is one of these larger squares. Just knowing the math a little bit, that's all I'm going to get into it that way. For refraction, I simply chose crystal, so that was really easy. One little trick that I did to create some imperfections in the glass is in the bump channel, in a very subtle way, I mixed a white and then a very light gray with a blender node that is, in this case, it happens to be one of Digital Carver Guild's Enhance C noise functions. I used a vector bozo, but you can do something very similar with the noise factory preset and stretch out the noise. You know how glass gets a kind of wavy ripple effect in it, especially if it's been cast instead of blown. You can go ahead and use noise that has been stretched out on the X and Z axis in Carrara, and you get these kind of banding type looks like you get right up here. You can kind of see how I have this banding. What this is doing is that when the light or the rays are thinking about recreating the scene here during render, it's changing the level of refraction, which is crystal right here, based on the bump. So I get these imperfections that show up in the glass when it starts to render. Real subtle, but you start seeing it where you're looking through the glass a little bit. And I also like the refraction, because as you get in and it functions only with an actual Fresnel effect going on, it starts warping whatever you can see on the other side as it gets to the dense parts. So it's these kind of ridiculous subtle things that actually help sell the image. So there's no displacement in it or anything like that. The wine itself, let me highlight that. And we'll turn this into, or we'll preview that here for the liquid. As I rotate this around, yeah, you can't even see the meniscus in here. Again, the color for this is black, but now you can see that down here in the transparency, I've got it set with red. I have the in-scattering set here, and when we come to absorption or the top level here, I don't have any Fresnel effect in here, and I believe over here in the glass area, I went ahead in Fresnel and bumped that up to about 23. Anywhere between 20 and 25 gives you a realistic type of Fresnel. And you may say, wait a minute, I'm hearing this word. What does it mean? Fresnel is, it's spelled Fresnel, F-R-E-S-N-E-L. Was a physicist in France a while ago, and he was studying optics in lighthouses, those lenses in the old-fashioned lighthouses. He invented those, studying refraction and how glass interacts with light. So his discovery, and it's pronounced Fresnel, is that as you get near the edge of the glass, reflectivity goes up depending on how significant the angle is of it. The only way I can describe this really that you'll go, oh yeah, I get it, is if you're walking by a car on a sunny day, there's certain positions that you can be in that you can't see into the car because of how much the light is reflecting into your eyes. But if you start looking straight on at the window, you can see into the car. It's only when you move off to the side that it becomes more reflective. That's exactly what goes on with the Fresnel effect here. So those have to be engaged. There's your whirlwind tour of that file. Hope you have some fun playing with glass. Now that we've looked at the Carrara file, let's just pop over real quickly to take a look at the Photoshop file, and that is right here. Let me shrink this up so you can see what's going on. Did very little post work in here, but I always do post work, and this is as small, holy cow, as I can get that. Nice. Let's see if I can hide that. There we go, because we want to see layers here. Yeah, we'll close up adjustments as well. Very basic changes here to the file. The biggest one is that, or I should say the ones I always do, is I like to add a little environment. So up here in the upper right hand corner, I added a flare. This could be done with light settings inside of Carrara if you want, with the light sphere. I prefer to do it in post-production because it's easier to change more rapidly. I don't have to go through a re-render. If I turn that off, you'll see it go away. Turn it back on here. Again, it's one of those kind of subtle little ideas right in there. Got it simply set as a color that has very low fill, transparency 50, so you can kind of see through it. Then the smoke over on the side here, a little more ambiance. This is just a brush pattern that I put in here on the top. Just click it and it goes away. It could be done with a billboard inside of Carrara. Again, I do it in post-production because I can move it around and make changes a little more quickly. On the smoke itself, it's got a fill adjustment right here of 21%. If I increase this, you'll see it get a little more significant in there. I didn't want it that bright, so I just pulled it down and made it a little more subtle. Then finally, as we're getting into some of these others, I increased the vibrance just to bring the color up here a little bit, one of those options, and I also brought up levels. If I turn off levels, you'll see that my render is very dark. It's an old photographer trick, really, that it's much easier to have a dark image and lighten it than a light image and make it darker. So I always err on the side of making a dark image, and then I can go ahead and bring levels up and adjust that to pull out detail that are in the scene and control color saturation a little bit better, those types of things. So there again is the little bit of work I did in Photoshop at the end of this to create this image. Hope you have some fun playing with the tool sets you've got.